Hello. Dave's talk, I cannot tell you how prescient his talk is, because yesterday I spent the whole day in front of Kevin Rooney, and I was at a preliminary hearing down in Bristol. And my advice to clients is, if you're going to go to a preliminary hearing, prepare as if you're going to a public inquiry. And that's exactly what we did do. And the business I was representing has a lot of vehicles, 900 vehicles. And there was a lot of information for Kevin Rooney to absorb. And to start the hearing, he was not at all happy about all that information. By the end of the hearing, he could not be more fulsome in his thanks for what the business had put together. But a feature of that hearing, and it echoes everything that Dave says, is brakes. Brakes, 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 brakes. And traffic commissioners know everything they need to know about brakes, and everything that Dave knows, they know. And they are absolutely on it when it comes to asking questions of transport managers who are acting for businesses, asking questions of transport consultants who might attend at a preliminary hearing or a public inquiry. So I cannot impress upon you enough the need to know everything about brakes back to front, including this issue, which is at the moment an issue that occurs at the MOT presentation when the vehicle has to be presented loaded, or laden, I should say. It's now also generally, and Richard may tweak what I'm about to say, but generally speaking, certainly the traffic commissioner I appear in front of the most, Sarah Bell, will be insistent that of the brake tests that she sees over a 12-month period, she wants at least 4 of those brake tests to be laden. And you'd be surprised by how few operators, how few maintenance providers will do that. And in my view, a good operator will do that as a minimum. And that's what's being expected by traffic commissioners. And you can understand why in the light of Dave's talk. So it's a key thing. The second thing I want to say by introduction is I'm the person you least want to see, because when I meet all of you, or some of you I should say, it's because something's gone wrong. So I'm at the end of something that's happened in maintenance, less now something that's happened with driver's hours. So maintenance, as you'll hear from my talk, is a central feature to everything that you do. And I know you know that, but it's become more and more of an issue in the time that I've been appearing in front of traffic commissioners, and embarrassingly that dates back to 1989. So brakes really, really, really matter. Maintenance really matters. Sorry if it's a boring echo, sorry if it's something that you're very familiar with, but you can never be too familiar, and your clients will look at you and say, look how much I'm spending. Sometimes it might not be enough, but they will say, this is costing me a fortune. I'm afraid if you're in this business, that's the thing you have to pay for. It's not easy because they're under so much financial pressure, but they risk not having a business if those sorts of reports are in front of a traffic commissioner. And believe you me, when you provide your vehicle files under a call-in letter, and maybe you've selected 5 vehicles from using Google Random or whatever, they go in there, and certainly someone like Kevin Rooney, he'd been through every single piece of paper, down to the fact that on one test, the tires were not good on pressure, and yet it had gone into a brake test. So he asked our transport manager, or one of our transport managers, why was this allowed to go when you were testing the brakes without the pressure being good on the tires? Why didn't you redo it? And those sort of questions, detailed that they are key issues for traffic commissioners. I know you all know this, but Dave's talk is one that you should read and learn at night, sort of thing, almost, because it's so important to your clients continuing in business. And as transport managers, I gather some of you here, it's a key to being having continuous and effective transport management under Article 4 of 1071. So sorry if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but it's absolutely key that you should know that. So what am I going to talk today about? Carolyn's introduction was nice, but it made it sound as if you could go to sleep before I start. It's not quite that boring because, looking at Traffic Commissioner reports, there's an issue here that you may be alive to. The last 3 years have been extraordinary for hauliers, but they've also been extraordinary for the regulator. And this talk is about something that you may not be as conscious about as possible, as you know about traffic commissioners, you know about their regulatory role, but I wonder whether you know about how much more they do. And I know that Richard's next to me, and I know I'm sounding like the teacher's pet, but I genuinely think at the moment that the pressures, political and administrative, that the traffic commissioners are under are at breaking point. That's my view, it's my personal view. And they're awaiting a review. They've awaited that review now for 3 years, 4 years, I think it is. And that review is going to overhaul the traffic commissioner system and their teams that they work with in the office of the traffic commissioner. And they've yet to know what is going to happen to the system. And what's going to happen to the system is going to affect all of you in this room. No question about it. So the talk is a bit more, exciting is the wrong word, but it's a bit more emotive. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm sure you know who all your traffic commissioners are. And this is a trick one, and I haven't done, I'm afraid, what I was asked to do, which is give you questions. I'm so sorry about that. Here are the traffic commissioners. This is their photograph on their report published in July 2022, but there's one mistake in it. And they're all lot. No, the one mistake is that one of these members, not gentlemen, has now stopped. He's retired, but he's carried on being a deputy, and he's gone over to work to be a independent assessor of the Civil Aviation Authority. And that's Nick Denton. There he is, that one there. Look at my finger, that's brilliant. And he has been replaced, does anyone know by? Next slide, please. Miles Dorrington, okay? And he's now in the West Midlands, he's now the West Midlands Traffic Commissioner. Acting, sorry, forgive me, acting. Now, do you know how many deputies there are? So you appear in front of traffic commissioners. Sometimes you might think when you get your call-in letter or you get notice of the hearing and where it's going to be and who the traffic commissioner is, you may think, well, if I'm in front of a deputy, he or she is not as good as the traffic commissioner, so we can relax a little. I'm sure you don't approach it in that way. And if, like me, you appear in front of someone called John Baker in the southeast, his knowledge of engineering is fantastic. So that there's nothing you can slip past the deputies, and one should never assume that a deputy is somehow a lesser commissioner than the traffic commissioner themselves. But I'm sure you approach it in that way anyway. Can I have the next slide, please? And I'm just going to adjust mine. Okay, so this will be obvious to you. You know their role, and it's interesting. If you download the annual review of traffic commissioners, one of the things that appears in every single review is the senior traffic commissioner spelling out the role of the traffic commissioners and what they do. And the key word in all of this for your clients and for those companies you might advise as transport managers, the key word is, does anyone know what I'm going to light on? It's regulate. They are not here, as some of your clients might think, to punish. They're there to regulate safe operation of vehicles. And yes, it's a boring mantra, but it feeds into everything that traffic commissioners do. And it's important to remember that because, let me give you an example. The transport manager or the director of transport that I was working with yesterday. He manages 8 transport managers, and he has 2 senior transport managers. And they provided a response to an MIVR, and it was a very detailed response, but it was also a very frustrated response. And this was before I alighted on it, because I tend to be temperate about these things. And so the response came across as very combative. And that's the first thing that Kevin Rooney noticed. And the point he was making is that, yes, you may get frustrated with DVSA. Yes, you may challenge PG9s on occasion. But remember, what they're doing is they're trying to ensure that vehicles run safely on the road. So when you read in a report this, that, or the other, it's not the vehicle examiner being difficult, it's the vehicle examiner carrying out his job. And again, I'm not being paid by the DVSA, but it's important in terms of how you then manage the process of preparing for a public inquiry or indeed a preliminary hearing. Yes, there's my emphasis there. TCs are independent regulators. They're not there on behalf of DVSA, although in the review, it's a confusing mishmash as far as I can read. There's always meant to have been this independence between Trafic Commissioners and DVSA, and there is. But physically, for instance, I noticed yesterday that when I went to Kevin Rooney, who, poor man, he works in a gloomy building, I have to say, almost windowless, and 100 meters away from his building is where DVSA is stationed in the western area. But there we go, they regulate, not punish. They're also, because they're regulators, they have to abide by the regulators' code. Can I have the next slide? Now, when you come to read the Trafic Commissioner's annual report, all of those things, all the narrative in those reports, and you can get them online, they tick every single one of those boxes. Regulators should carry out their activities in a way that supports those that they regulate to comply and grow. Regulators should share information about compliance, should ensure it's clear information. Never more has that been needed than over the 2019-2020 period. And one of the interesting historical facts, because it already, certainly for me, seems such a long time ago, is the amount of elasticity that Trafic Commissioners up and down the country sought to provide hauliers in issues to do with maintenance, issues to do with driver recruitment. There were issues to do with applications, issues to do with holding virtual public inquiries. But they were offering guidance, and that is one of their roles. It's not just, you're appearing before me, I'm very disappointed to see that you've given all these undertakings and look where we are now. It's not just about that, although that is part of the role. Next slide, please. So this is the bit that I'm getting hot under the collar, and I'm not even a Trafic Commissioner. This is a review that has been around for a while, and the refrain, certainly in this, the latest report from the Trafic Commissioner, so coming out in July 2022, but up to March 2022, there still isn't this review, and I think it's been mooted since 2019. Yeah. And there is so much in this review that is going to affect what you do and affects what I do, but more importantly than anyone, what Richard Turfitt does and his colleagues. So look at that first item, whether the functions that are provided by and in the name of Trafic Commissioners are required. Okay? So that's a pretty far-reaching analysis, whether the Trafic Commissioners are carrying out their functions effectively and efficiently. So the pressure that's placed on Trafic Commissioners at the moment, and again, I promise you this is my view, and I'm not here to talk on behalf of Trafic Commissioners, is extraordinary. Look at this one here, whether the Office of the Trafic Commissioner's support continues to be provided by DVSA or would be more effective if separated. I'm sure you all have a view about that, and how that might how that might work, and separated given DVSA's enforcement functions and the Traffic Commissioner role as independent regulators. So one can see there, it's not simply the Department for Transport being difficult, although it feels like it. It feels like it's the headmaster's report, and this is what you haven't been doing right, and this is what you're going to do from now on. And then this catch-all here, which is incredibly difficult to anticipate for traffic commissioners and for the Office of the Traffic Commissioner, the effectiveness and appropriateness of existing governance, accountability assurance, and intelligence sharing arrangements, okay, and the appropriateness of delivering additional functions. Isn't language brilliant? Because really, what that should all be saying in 3-4 words is overhauling the system. Should we be doing it, and if so, how? And that's what, we're in that limbo at the moment, and it's almost irresponsible that that hasn't been resolved, because, as I say, it will affect all of us in here, and at a critical junction for the industry, because the industry is under so much pressure, given how the doors have opened under e-commerce, and at the same time, there are all the pressures on finding drivers, finding transport managers. It's a difficult time for the industry. Next slide, please. So, I sort of anticipated that slide. Left in limbo. And this again, this is just me saying this, and this is something I've always felt about the treatment of traffic commissioners and the Traffic Commissioner's Office. And it almost, and I may be exaggerating a little, it's always almost made me think, when I started doing this practice, all my colleagues in my chambers used to think it was a joke practice. And I was known as the Yorkie Bar barrister, okay, because, you know, oh, you're dealing with trucks, you're dealing with buses, you're dealing with coaches, fine. And it's a bit like, if you want, the attitude that is taken to, you know, inspectors in the police force on the one hand, and the traffic police on the other. And I have a sense, I may be completely wrong about it, that there's a sort of hidden prejudice about what you do, about what I do, and about what traffic commissioners do. Is it really taken seriously? And it's taken seriously often at the point when there is a disaster, when a lorry fails, crashes into a pram, kills the mother and the child. And at that point, it's taken seriously, not because what you all do, you do well, but because somebody doesn't do what you all do well. And then everybody gets criticized. So what I'm letting you know is I think what you do is a very difficult job on a day-to-day basis. And the emphasis yesterday from Kevin Rooney in relation to the transport manager that was called to the preliminary inquiry to decide whether or not it should go on to a public inquiry to consider their repute, he echoed what you all need to understand as transport managers, and you need to read the statutory, I'm going to call it the statutory guidance, I know it's not meant to be called that, on transport managers. But continuous and effective day-to-day control of the management regime of transport really means that any transport manager who's designated on a standard license has to be at the heart of what's going on a day-to-day basis, regardless of the size of the business. And that was a point that Kevin Rooney articulated very, very clearly. And it's one that I know you know, but it's worth repeating. And it's worth repeating to those people who employ you, or whether when you're going in to see a business and you're looking at the transport management arrangements and the role of the transport manager there, it's important, I suspect, for you to emphasize to the operator, do you realize what he or she has to do and how much support should be given here? And the decisions that he or she advises you on are actually central to you keeping your business going. The transport manager's role is absolutely critical to the modern fleet. It's an obvious point, but sometimes it gets lost in the wash. And what I mean by that is the subtlety between being an administrator as a transport manager and being at the center of what's going on in transport management. Don't be an administrator as a transport manager. That's not what the law requires you to do under 1071 2009. That's retained EU legislation. Look at Article 4 and look to see again what it is a transport manager should be doing. But it's in the statutory guidance as well. Next slide, please. So it is extraordinary how recent 2019 is and how far away it seems, because the impact of COVID on everybody and the tragic impact on so many plays out in the Trafic Commissioners' reports. And it's worth looking at them again, if only to get that awful chill of quite how difficult it was for lots of you. It's so silly to give you links when you haven't got it on paper. But there we are. I can email it to anyone who wants it. So let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, hey, this is just history for you. The pandemic had wreaked havoc, tragic havoc for many. What was happening in the industry, even greater reliance on HEVs, coach and bus decimated. I gave a talk, a virtual talk, during the pandemic to coach operators, and 40 coach operators attended. It was all on screen, and most of them were family businesses, and most of them were going bust. And they were having to deal with guidance produced by the government on safe carriage of passengers and how complicated that had become. It was complicated for everyone, but they wanted my advice and the advice of my good friend Tim Nesbitt on what they should do. How should they interpret that guidance? And it was very difficult to give them legal advice on that because it was so stretched and so elastic, and each had a different view of what they could actually spend on providing that. But if they didn't, then they couldn't run coaches. But they were running coaches half full, and it was an incredibly difficult time. So what we have in the way the reports work is that there's a general introduction by the senior traffic commissioner, and then traffic commissioners in England say their piece, and then the Traffic Commissioner for Scotland and the Traffic Commissioner for Wales also put in a part of it. So this is by way of example of what Traffic Commissioners were doing in providing advice during COVID time, and publishing a framework for remote audits and desk-based assessments, virtual training, reduced registration notification. So that's to do with buses. And I'm sure all of you who were working then in the industry were dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis. But what is interesting, what's a facet of the Traffic Commissioner regime, is their role in providing guidance. So it's not, and that's part of the regulatory code, but it's something that's often overlooked when you're talking about what traffic commissioners do. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's the review of the functions was due to take place, so that's in that report. Still a large number of operators' licenses being issued, and 318 public hearings. Have I got that? I've now forgotten what that stands for, but I'll remember in a minute.
Public inquiries.
That's public inquiries there. And that's right, thank you so much. So the preliminary hearings, and the one statistic I would have liked, and this is a request, is of those preliminary hearings, how many went to public inquiry? Because I don't know about all of you, I don't know how many preliminary hearings you'll have attended, but I welcome the idea of the preliminary hearing. It's been around for a while. I have a sense it's being used a bit more. That may be simply because I've been involved in more recently. But I think they are a very constructive way. It's rather like the meetings with senior team leaders, but there's a lot of expense that goes into the preparation for a preliminary hearing, or certainly if you were to come to me and seek my advice, that it is a very no, but it's an expensive exercise, not simply because of my cost, but because of the cost in time for the operator in what they have to put together if it's going to be a successful outcome.
Patrick, if I might ask,
Yeah.
Do you mind? Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
No, I don't need that. I don't need that, do I? No, good. Good, because I can't stand them. I think Patrick's impression is right. I think the prelims, my own impression from my area, but also from discussing with colleagues, they're generally successful at diverting cases away from public inquiry. If you take them seriously, if you take the opportunity seriously, you come to do the preparation, spend the time, not necessarily the money, but well, do spend the money because Patrick's brilliant. But they are a really successful way. Come with your plan. Don't just ignore them. And I think they are quite successful at deflecting away. I can't give you percentages, but I would be surprised if more than 10% came back.
High, I would say.
Yeah, so they are good. And yes, you're right, we are using them more to try and shift those borderline cases away from public inquiry, only targeting the seriously non-compliant. Oh, Caroline stepped out. Damn it. She didn't hear me use the phrase. What's that point? Thank you for letting me interrupt.
No, that's fine. One of the features that you may have taken advantage of is this last thing, Traffic Commissioner bulletins. And they've been a very useful lever for me as a practitioner to use, having those bulletins, because, again, it's fulfilling what they're required to do under the regulatory code. But they also have been very useful. The one I've been most closely involved in was the advice on emulators and AdBlue. I don't know if any of you know all about that, but the ability to fit into your vehicle a very sophisticated piece of computerized equipment which enables you to bypass the need for having AdBlue. And it gives false readings on the dash with lighting and everything. And that became a big issue in 2018, 2019. And the Traffic Commissioners issued a bulletin on that issue. And it was a very interesting one because it was just reminding everyone, as indeed we were reminded about yesterday, the Traffic Commissioner was upset that there wasn't a gauge in the various depots of this business that measured when AdBlue was being taken out. And you may be thinking, well, why, gosh, that's going too far. But no, there's a point to it because it's an all-round system. You have to show that use is being made. And if you have a record of it, like everything you do, and I know you know all this, but if you have a record of it, it tells the Traffic Commissioner and or the DVSA when they come on unannounced visits that you're doing things properly. But it was picked up by the Traffic Commissioner here. Go on to the next one, please. Okay, so this is an issue that I'm sure you're aware of as managers. Self-employed drivers. What's the big no-no about self-employed drivers? Who controls them? Certainly not the operator, because the operator has to pull back at that point if there's a driver infringement or there's an overloading. Is he or she in a position to discipline that driver? You tell me. It's an issue that is fraught, and Traffic Commissioners will, and most recently I'm doing an appeal at the moment where the Traffic Commissioner simply hasn't been satisfied with the documentation that's been provided that suggests that drivers are all under employment contracts. But the closer you read it, the more obvious it is that actually it's all a bit of a fiction. And again, something that I'm sure you're on, and you see what I've said in blue, that's a direct quote from it. And then we come to what Dave was talking to us about, but the emphasis has already been made. That's a sort of TripAdvisor review there, that brake testing you cannot do enough about when you're helping your client prepare for a public inquiry, or you're advising generally without any threat of public inquiry about the brake testing issues. Bridge strikes at that time were becoming uncomfortably more frequent, and bridge strikes, I'm sure you all know about. Bridge strikes are just a no-no. They should not happen if you're running a properly compliant business, because it's all about route planning, it's all about anticipating, and it's as is said in the report, there was a national focus on it. No excuse, there's ample guidance. Looking at the stats, very boring for you, but just very quickly. Thank you. Or not. Well, no, the issue that in spite of COVID, and it hadn't really started to bite by the implications of COVID hadn't really started to bite by the time this was published, or over the period that this was covering. So this covers up to March 31st, 2020. And sorry, it's a hectic display, not very well done, but you can see that this is in relation to HGVs and PSVs. Number of PSV public inquiries always much lower, right across the board in all the reports that I've read. But there's a surprisingly disproportionate revocation rate, and a higher percentage revocation rate for PSVs. And I don't know why that might be, except that the most obvious issue is that the goods that they're carrying are passengers. And I don't mean any disrespect to passengers, but that's a key difference. And therefore, any issues of maintenance, taken seriously as they are with HGVs, because you're driving a dangerous weapon, with a PSV, it's even more of an issue, if you want. A surprising number of suspensions in HGV. I say surprising because, of course, what I always say to poor traffic commissioners, if you suspend, you might as well revoke, is what I'm always saying. One of the things you must be aware of is if you find yourself advising a client, an operator, about, or you're a transport manager even, one of the things that you would want to be able to show, and you need to show at public inquiries, or indeed, yes, public inquiries, is if you want to manage or offset the threat of suspension, you really have to drill down in the evidence that you provide to say that suspension will kill the business. And you may think it's an obvious issue. It's the same with curtailment. Traffic commissioners require good evidence and not emotive evidence about regulatory action that they are being encouraged to take that falls short of revocation. Oh yes, there's my point about no figure on which to go PI. Driver conduct hearings, I don't know how much any of you get involved in those, but it's a responsibility, as you might anticipate, that traffic commissioners take very seriously. It's not a side issue. It's at the core of what they do as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've moved a year on, and by now, COVID is really having its economic impact. It's having its social impact, and there we see, this is in the introduction to the report, exponential increase in e-commerce, and gosh, boy does it go on. Certainly where I live in Shepherd's Bush in London, the number of vans that come up and down our street all during the day, and because I'm working at home at the moment, is extraordinary. 79% of domestic freight by road, that's what you do, and that's important to recognize how important it is what you do. Then PIs dropping, and rather facetiously I put, I wonder why.
Private Eye wrote that.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Idiots. Sorry, we're being recorded.
All right.
Edit that out, please.
Okay.
It's a great magazine. I love it.
So there is also this issue, which I know for many of you is a frustration, and I know whenever traffic commissioners come to the Association of Road Transport Lawyers meetings, it's something that we always beat them up about, and that's That's the time it takes for applications to be processed. And when you read the reports, you suddenly realize actually this is something that is constantly being reviewed and looked at by traffic commissioners. It's not something that they simply expect the administrators up in Leeds to just get on with. It is a very present pressure, and you can see the impact that COVID had on the ability to administer and process HGV applications here. And yes, there were these again guidance provided. Some of you may have become involved in exemptions for those with restricted licenses to operate as standard, and that issue was to do with the fact that there were fewer trucks on the road effectively, and things needed to get going and go on again. And this was this was a proactive approach that the traffic commissioners took to a very immediate issue. And again, what I'm trying to tell you is that it's not simply about public inquiries. Next slide, please. And I'm way over time, aren't I now? You're all right. Am I? I'm just over. I've got another 4 years to go. No, don't worry. Oh, there's me gone.
Craig, we've lost the slideshow. Can you help?
Well, I can tell you what it is. I'll look. Oh, goody. Okay.
It's probably my fault, I'm afraid.
Okay. So this is an extraordinary. The headline figure there, and Richard will correct me if I've understood it properly, but applications stood at a 13-year high. The previous high had been 2007. There's an improvement for applications being processed, and the echo of what you've already heard this morning, and I wasn't here all morning, but I understand that previous speakers have told you about that. But there you have in blue, quote from the report, the role of commissioners is fundamentally about road safety through regulation. Yes, of course, there's the issue about competitive playing field, that it should, when you have lots of operators who do everything by the book, unfair competition by those who don't do everything by the book is an issue and is weighed in the balance as well. But this third bullet point is really what it all comes down to. This was an interesting development, the Traffic Commissioner mail shots, and a rather nice sort of use of haulage language, positive traction, due to high level of trust placed in the service. So it's the issue of traction. So when you receive the mail shot on specific issues from the Traffic Commissioner, you don't need to open it with trepidation. It's all about trying to help you. And then at that point, there was an issue about light good vehicles wanting to go abroad post-Brexit, and the imposition on their having to have, so if you had a 2 to 3 ton van, you were going to need to get an operator's license. You may have been aware of that at the time. Fortunately, as you will see, that was then avoided. Next one, please. So here's what the English commissioners are saying. And this, the bit in blue, is really what informs the high level of revocations in that year, and the reason why revocations are imposed. And it may be a glimpse of the obvious for all of you, and it comes back again to the issue of road safety and the issue of fair competition. But there's no harm in reminding those people for whom you have to provide advice. This is an interesting issue that echoes what we were hearing earlier. 85% of roadside fines for infringements could be avoided if the driver had performed a walk-around check. It's astonishing how, for as long as I've been doing this, this still occurs as an issue. 85%. So what's going on? Why are daily driver checks still not as they should be? Next slide, please. There we go. Yes, so this is where people were wanting to apply as transport managers, and they were relying on foreign certification. And this isn't a Little Britain issue, it's an issue about different standards that apply. And the standards that apply for our CPCs happens to be more rigorous than elsewhere. And traffic commissioners were getting axed about the use of external CPCs. There had been a big issue in relation to load security, so tipper vehicles not being properly sheeted and badly loaded. And this was something that Dave was talking about. So there was an increase, I don't know if you've been aware of this, of people operating traction vehicles only, so pulling around the tankers. And there's been a mismatch between, on the one hand, the traction operator, and on the other hand, the people who have the trailers. And sometimes there has been a lack of coordination about brake tests, and that has come up, and they wanted to point this out. And there you have it there in green. As I say, if any of you want it, I can email you this, but I must go on. Thanks.
Next slide, Craig. Hey.
Just one.
Ready?
Just one back, and then we're nearly there, everybody. Thank you for your patience. So,
Previous one?
yeah, this is an interesting take on everything I've been telling you. So, in this latest report, one of the issues that's come up, and that I'm sure you're all aware of, much more than I would be, is driver welfare, and how that has become a very pressing issue, and especially during COVID, and an increasing concern about how well drivers are being looked after. Interestingly enough, a colleague of mine, and not a colleague, but a lawyer who does this work, is also holds an HGV license, and during COVID, he went driving, and he went driving for 12 months. And he gave us a talk about it, and it is such a difficult life being a driver. And it was a brilliant talk, and it made us all, well, certainly me, it took my breath away how difficult it is. I mean, even down to issues of diet. I mean, it's appalling what some drivers have to go through, and how difficult the timings of everything is, and going to logistics hubs, and it's a difficult job, and I know you all know that. Interesting issue about driver shortage. I've been involved in a bus registration issue in the south of England, where havoc was caused by COVID, and buses not being able to run, and therefore issues about having to re-register. Difficult issues for traffic commissioners to deal with, but of course much more difficult for those people running buses. We can see the figure in brackets is the previous year, and we can see the number of revocations. And this is a rather cheeky one of mine, because I knew Richard Turfitt was going to be here, and I was trying to work out who is the strictest traffic commissioner in the whole of the operating world. And if there was any doubt. So, any conclusions to draw from what I've been saying and from the rather rapid read-through of my slides? Again, I don't say this because Richard Turfitt is here. I do get a sense that there's an extraordinary amount of pressure on traffic commissioners. It's not stopping them doing their work, of course, but it's destabilizing at the moment, and it's a period of uncertainty, which I feel no regulator should have to deal with. This may be obvious to you. You may think it's a bit too fawning on my part, but it's borne out by my review of these reports. Traffic commissioners are on the industry side. And third bullet point, again, obvious to you. I don't even need to rehearse it, except the emphasis there. I mean, it is the compliance issue from my perspective of everything I've read and what I do. A very, very simple mantra for why an operator will have their license revoked: too high a risk to road safety. That encapsulates it so well, actually. And so that's something. I mean, how do you measure that risk? Okay, I understand that, but that is what it boils down to. And advice to operators, and I'm sure many of you do this already until you're blue in the face: hone in on daily driver defect reporting, hone in on something that we heard Dave talk about, issues about rectification. Again, an issue that Kevin Rooney was picking up with my clients yesterday. You're presenting me with these safety inspection reports. Hey, where's the rectification signature? The signature that is there is totally illegible. I have no idea who it is, and on this one it doesn't even appear. It's an issue that they get upset about, and rightly so. I say they as if they're aliens, but traffic commissioners get upset about. And then finally, ending on where Dave began, breaks. And that's it from me, really. But thank you very much. Sorry I've gone over.